The movie begins with a stunning view of breathtaking landscapes and tall mountains standing proudly against the horizon. However, the serene imagery is disrupted by unsettling noises echoing from the mountains. One massive mountain appears to have a face etched into its surface, and the noise is heart-wrenching, growing louder and more intense. Suddenly, the screen glitches, and Iris is shocked. Shifting her position, she notices a small red boat on her bedside table. Rising from the bed, she heads to the kitchen, grabs a pocket knife, and leaves the house. It is early morning, and the sun is still hidden below the horizon. Iris drives with the tiny red boat resting on the car seat beside her. She stops at Massey Big Sur State Park, steps out of the car, and takes the ship in hand. With determination, she begins her trek up the mountain. Navigating rocky trails, she eventually reaches a somber destination, a tiny grave. The grave belongs to her little boy. Iris carefully cleans the frame, carves her name into a nearby tree trunk, and places the red boat gently in front of the grave. With tears welling in her eyes, she walks to the edge of a nearby cliff. Closing her eyes, she takes a deep breath and steps forward, ready to leap, when suddenly a voice interrupts her. Startled, she turns to see a man standing nearby. "I'll be gone in a minute," he says casually, unwrapping a piece of candy and unwrapping it. After popping it into his mouth, he asks about the boy buried there. Iris, visibly upset, cuts him off, stating that she doesn't want to discuss it. The man introduces himself as Richard and asks for her name, but she remains silent. Attempting to lighten the mood, Richard admits that she's making him nervous. "If you're not going to step back from the edge, at least tell me your name," he pleads. Despite her silence, Richard continues talking. He shares how he too wanted to be alone, which is why he climbed the mountain so early in the morning. But Iris remains stoic, her feet planted near the edge. She tells him he cannot stop her, but she doesn't move any closer to the brink. In a last-ditch effort, Richard begins telling her his story. He explains that his car crashed in a terrible accident, and though he survived, he lost the love of his life. "The crash was so bad," he says. "I couldn't move for 2 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. I was trapped in the hospital, unable to escape. Every visitor I had would only look at me with pity." For the first time, Iris responds softly, saying, "I'm sorry." Richard asks, "Do you have anything else to say?" Iris finally speaks, telling Richard about the day her son died. She recalls how her husband carved names into a tree, while their son enthusiastically declared he could gather all the sticks needed to roast marshmallows in just a minute. Iris had gone to pick flowers, but her son slipped from the mountain. They hadn't heard him scream. She confesses she hasn't been able to cry since that day. She wants to, but she feels utterly broken. Richard listens quietly and replies, "Broken doesn't mean hopeless." He stands to leave, bidding her goodbye. As he walks away, Iris finally tells him her name. Richard pauses and says he won't stop her from doing what she intends, but urges her to hold on to hope. "It's a beautiful day," he adds before continuing. After a moment, Iris begins following him. Together, they descend the mountain. Along the way, Richard stops and tells her he can't let her go back to hurt herself. Iris dismisses him, insisting he won't interfere. When they reach the parking area, she heads to her car, only to find it blocked by Richard's vehicle. Frustrated, she tries to get into her car, but Richard emerges from his holding an umbrella. She raises an eyebrow. "Is it about to rain?" Richard calmly replies, "I like to be prepared." Before she can respond, he suddenly strikes her with the umbrella, shocking her. She collapses unconscious. Richard ties her up and places her in his car. Moments later, Iris regains consciousness only to realize she's been kidnapped. She wakes up in the car's back seat, scared and confused. She struggles to untie herself but fails. Desperate, she tries to use her smartwatch to call for help, only to realize there's no signal. Richard notices her efforts and says calmly, "Go ahead, try, but there are no signals and you don't have your phone." Iris says, "My husband will be looking for me." Richard smirks and says, "Oh, I got you something." He hands her the little red boat, her son's keepsake. Seeing it triggers a memory, and she recalls the pocket knife in her possession. Hiding her intentions, she tries to talk to Richard. "What are you going to do to me?" she asks. He looks at her with a strange smile. "I was thinking, maybe braid your hair." At that moment, she unties her hands. Iris seizes the opportunity and attacks him with the knife. Richard struggles to push her back as the car veers off the road, crashing into a tree. She tries to escape the vehicle, but Richard grabs her hair, refusing to let her go. She pulls out the knife again, and they engage in a brutal struggle. Iris fights with all her strength, attempting to strangle him with the seatbelt. Richard pushes a button, causing his seat to shift back, momentarily freeing himself. The fight continues, but Iris manages to untie herself and escape the car. As she starts running, Richard shouts after her, "I injected you!" She freezes, momentarily horrified. Richard emerges from the car and continues, "The setting, the isolation, the timing, it's all perfect. I knew you might resist, so I prepared." Iris backs away yelling, "What did you do to me?" Richard grins darkly. "Your body will shut down soon. I gave you a body relaxer. In 20 minutes, you'll be completely paralyzed. You won't be able to use your phone or hold your knife in 1 minute. By 10 minutes, your legs will start tingling. At 15 minutes, you'll lose gross motor control. Your breathing will falter by 18, and your voice will be on at 20. You won't even be able to shout." Iris stares at him in disbelief. "Come with me, Iris," he says coldly. Instead, she turns and bolts into the forest. Running as fast as she can, she finally stops to check her fingers. They're starting to stiffen. Desperate, she flashes back to teaching her son how to count on his fingers, the memory momentarily comforting her. But Richard's voice cuts through the silence. "You can't escape, Iris. Less than an hour and we'll be together." Panicking, she rechecks her fingers. They're barely moving. Sliding down a hill, her legs finally give out. Terrified but determined, she crawls downhill toward the riverside. 3 minutes before complete paralysis, she reaches the riverbank. Her legs are completely unresponsive, and she drags herself under a tree trunk for cover. Richard's voice echoes nearby. "Hope you found a good hiding spot, Iris." She lies still, trying not to make a sound, but ants start biting her face. Unable to bear the pain, she crawls toward the river. Richard follows her, but he's a little far, and she gets into the rover before he gets her. "You won't be able to swim," he shouts. But Iris doesn't stop. She pulls herself into the water, ready to fight for her life. Iris musters enough energy to hold onto a tree trunk floating in the river. Using every ounce of strength, she pushes herself to the riverbank and crawls onto the grass. But as the timer hits 20 minutes, her body succumbs entirely to the effects of the injection. She lies immobile, staring at the ground, unable to move or speak. Suddenly, she hears the hum of a lawnmower. Bill, an older man tending to his garden by the river. His small shack is nearby, and he spots her lying motionless. Concerned, Bill rushes to her side and tries to speak, but Iris can't respond. She can only move her eyes. Noticing her eye movements, Bill realizes she's conscious but paralyzed. He tilts her gently and asks questions, trying to make sense of the situation. "I'll call the cops," he says reassuringly, deciding to help. Bill brings a trolley and carefully lifts Iris onto it, taking her inside his house. He places her on the couch and continues asking her questions, trying to understand what happened. But before she could even blink a warning, the doorbell rang. Iris moves her eyes frantically, signaling danger. Bill picks up on her panic, quickly hides her under the couch, and goes to answer the door. Standing there is Richard, now introducing himself as Andrew. He's disheveled and claims he was in a car accident. "I'm looking for my wife," he says, his voice desperate. Bill narrows his eyes, skeptical. "You stay out here. I'm calling the cops." But Andrew steps inside uninvited, spinning a sob story. He sits on the couch above Iris and starts to cry. "I lost my phone, my wife, everything," he says, weaving a web of lies. Bill begins to waver, considering that Andrew might be telling the truth. But just then a phone rings. Andrew's phone, tucked away in his pocket. Bill's demeanor changes instantly. You said you lost your phone," he says sharply. "Get out of my house, now." Andrew tries to backpedal, but Bill grabs the phone to call the cops. Before he can finish dialing, Andrew attacks him. A brutal fight ensues, but Andrew overpowers Bill, stabbing him fatally. With Bill lying lifeless on the floor, Andrew pours petrol around the house, preparing to destroy the evidence. Just as he's about to set it ablaze, he notices a faint trail of blood leading from under the couch. At first, he dismisses it, walking back to Bill's truck, but something gnaws at him. He returns, lifts the couch, and finds Iris. Dragging her out, he sets the house on fire with Bill's body inside. He then loads Iris into Bill's truck and drives away. As he's speeding down the road, Andrew's phone rings. It's his daughter. "Dad, I got all A's. Can we celebrate?" she says excitedly. "Mom and I are coming to the cabin in the woods." Andrew's face tightens. The cabin in the woods is exactly where he's taking Iris. For the first time, she realizes he had been lying to her all along during their first encounter on the mountain. Andrew forces a smile into his voice. "That's great, sweetheart. I'll see you both soon." He hangs up and glances at Iris in the rearview mirror. Guess it's time to wrap this up quickly. Richard pulls into a gas station to refuel Bill's stolen truck. He parks by the pump and heads inside the shop to pay for the gas. Meanwhile, Iris, still tied up in the car, desperately tries to move. Only one of her fingers has regained motion, but she's determined to find a way out. As she struggles, a boy approaches the truck. He waves at Iris through the window, his innocent smile briefly lifting her spirits. The boy's mother, noticing her son lingering, comes over to fetch him. She spots Iris but hesitates to say much and leaves with the boy. But before she can act, Richard steps out of the store, his behavior cold and rough. He gets into the truck and drives off quickly, leaving the confused mother standing at the pump. Knowing that he might have drawn attention, Richard drives to a remote area where he left his wrecked car from his earlier fight with Iris. As he begins transferring items from Bill's truck to his damaged car, a highway patrol officer pulls up. The officer approaches polite but wary. "Everything all right here, sir?" This truck matches a report from a gas station. Richard puts on a calm facade. "Just switching vehicles. My wife, she's drunk and she had an accident, and I'm here to do my car out." However, the officer doesn't buy what Bill says and tries to talk to Iris. She can now move her lips, but her voice is super slow. The officer gets close to her, but Richard lunges at him, brutally killing him to silence any further investigation. Breathing heavily, Richard grabs the officer's gun, loads Iris back into his car, and heads for his final destination, a secluded lake. At the lake, Richard prepares to drown Iris. He places weights in a small rowboat and drags her into it, her body still mostly immobilized. As they row into deeper water, Iris begins regaining motor skills. Her fingers twitch, then her hands, and finally she gathers enough strength to move her arms. She asks Richard to give her his little boy boat, which she kept in her pocket. As he tries to get it from her pocket, she stabs him in the neck with all her might. Richard recoils, blood pouring from the wound. Furious, he grabs the gun he stole from the patrol officer, but Iris fights back fiercely, managing to wrestle the gun away. In the chaotic struggle, she shoots him multiple times, the bullets piercing not only Richard, but also the fragile hull of the rowboat. Richard collapses, lifeless into the water, but the damage is done. The boat begins to take on water rapidly. Iris, still partially paralyzed, is unable to move fast enough to save herself. The ship sinks and she plunges into the cold, dark lake. As the water engulfs her, Iris fights to stay conscious, her will to survive more powerful than ever. Iris emerges from the water and swims to the dock where they embark. Richard, mortally wounded, floats ashore several yards away. Iris makes her way to him, thanks him for renewing her will to live, and walks away, leaving him to a presumably painful death. The movie ends here.